I paid off my parents' condo and sent them on a trip, but at the family gathering, my mom laughed and stated, "He's just our walking wallet." So I froze every account and awoke to 31 missed calls. I, 32M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. 24 hours ago, I was the golden child. Today, I'm apparently the family villain. Let me explain how a single overheard comment destroyed 20 years of financial generosity. I've been successful in tech for the past decade. Started my own consulting firm at 25, and it took off faster than I ever imagined. By 30, I was making more money than I knew what to do with. My parents raised me with strong values about family loyalty, so when success came, sharing felt natural. It started small. Dad mentioned their mortgage was getting tough on his teacher's salary. Mom worried about retirement on her nurse's pension. I offered to help with payments. Then it became bigger things. Medical bills, home repairs. Eventually, I just took over the mortgage completely. Last month, I paid off their entire condo, a $180,000 balance, as an early Christmas gift. But that wasn't enough. I wanted to do something special. My parents hadn't taken a real vacation in 15 years. They'd always talked about visiting Europe, but claimed they could never afford it. So I planned a 3-week trip to Italy and France. First-class flights, luxury hotels, guided tours, spending money, the works. Cost me nearly $25,000, but seeing their faces when I surprised them was worth every penny. They left 2 weeks ago, sending daily photos of themselves at the Colosseum, the Eiffel Tower, enjoying wine in Tuscany. I felt proud. This was what success was for, taking care of the people who sacrificed for you. Yesterday was my cousin's birthday party. Extended family gathering at my aunt's house. I usually skip these events because work keeps me busy, but I just finished a major project and felt like celebrating. My parents weren't back yet, but everyone else was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. The party was going well. People asking about work, congratulating me on recent successes. I stepped outside to take a business call that ran longer than expected. When I finished, I heard voices coming from the kitchen window above the patio. I recognized my aunt's voice immediately, then my mom's. My blood ran cold as I listened. My aunt was asking about the trip, how they could afford such luxury. Mom laughed, this carefree, almost dismissive laugh that I'd never heard before. She told my aunt not to worry about money anymore, because I'd taken care of everything. The condo was paid off, the trip was free, and I'd probably pay for whatever they needed next. Then came the words that shattered everything. My aunt asked if she felt bad about taking so much from me. Mom's response was instant, like she'd thought about this before. She said she didn't feel bad at all because I had more money than I knew what to do with, and besides, I was just their walking wallet at this point. She actually laughed while saying it. My aunt seemed shocked, asking what she meant. Mom explained that I was so desperate for their approval and love that I'd pay any amount to keep them happy. She said it was almost too easy. Whenever they mentioned needing something, I'd just throw money at it without question. She called me naive and said I'd never learn the value of money because everything came too easily for me. But the worst part was what came next. My aunt asked if they even appreciated what I did for them. There was a pause. Then Mom said appreciation was nice, but unnecessary because I wasn't doing it for them. I was doing it for myself, to feel important and needed. She said I got more out of giving them money than they got from receiving it. So really, they were doing me the favor. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes, hoping I'd misheard something, waiting for her to say she was joking or being sarcastic. Instead, she continued talking about how easy it was to manipulate me into paying for things. She mentioned planting seeds about expenses weeks before asking for help, making me think I was coming up with solutions on my own. I walked to my car in a daze and drove home. Spent the entire night staring at my computer screen, looking at bank statements, trying to calculate how much I'd given them over the years. The number was staggering. Conservative estimate, over $400,000 in the past 7 years. Mortgage payments, car payments, medical bills, home improvements, vacations, emergency funds, retirement contributions. Things they'd asked for and things I'd offered. By morning, I made my decision. I called my bank and froze every account that had their names on it. Joint savings account I'd set up for their emergencies. Credit card I'd added them to for convenience. Investment account where I'd been building their retirement fund. Everything. Then I called my attorney and had him draft letters canceling their power of attorney over my healthcare decisions and removing them as beneficiaries from my life insurance and retirement accounts. I wasn't thinking about death, but I realized they'd positioned themselves to benefit from every aspect of my life. The call started around noon. First, Dad, asking if there was an issue with the bank because their card was declined at lunch. His voice was confused but not panicked. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom called, more insistent, asking what was going on because she couldn't access their emergency account. I turned my phone off and went for a long drive. Needed time to think about how to handle this. Part of me wanted to call them back and pretend nothing happened. But every time I considered it, I heard Mom's laugh echoing in my head. That dismissive, almost cruel laugh when she called me their walking wallet. When I turned my phone back on that evening, I had 31 missed calls. 23 from Mom, 8 from Dad. The voicemails started confused and worried, then became increasingly frantic. The last few were Mom crying, begging me to call back, saying she didn't understand what was happening. I called Dad back. He answered before the first ring finished. He asked what was going on with the accounts, his voice shaky with panic. I told him calmly that I decided to restructure my financial arrangements and needed to close some accounts. He asked what that meant for them, and I explained that meant they'd need to handle their own expenses going forward. The silence stretched for almost a minute. Then he asked if something had happened, if they'd done something wrong. I could hear Mom in the background, asking what I was saying. I told him I'd overheard Mom's conversation at the party yesterday. Another long silence. Then Dad asked me to repeat what I'd heard. I gave him the highlights: walking wallet, manipulation, lack of genuine appreciation. Dad's voice broke as he tried to explain. He said Mom sometimes said things she didn't mean when she was trying to fit in with family. He begged me to reconsider, saying they truly were grateful for everything I'd done. I felt terrible hearing him so upset, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was probably rehearsed too. How many times had they discussed my financial contributions? How many conversations had I not overheard? I told Dad I needed time to process everything and hung up. That was 12 hours ago. My phone hasn't stopped ringing since. Update 1. The calls continued all night. I finally answered one from Mom around 3 a.m. because the crying in her voicemails was becoming hard to ignore. She was sobbing, asking what she could do to fix this. She admitted she'd said those things but claimed she was just trying to sound sophisticated in front of my aunt, who'd always made her feel inferior about money. She said she didn't mean any of it and begged me to understand that she'd never seen me as just a source of money. I asked her directly, if I never gave them another dollar, would our relationship be the same? The pause was too long. When she finally answered, she said of course it would be, but her voice lacked conviction. I told her I'd given them over $400,000 in 7 years, and she gasped like she'd never considered the total. She started crying harder, saying she never realized it was so much, that they never asked for that kind of money. That's when I lost my patience. I reminded her of every major expense I'd covered, every time she'd mentioned financial stress, and I'd offered solutions. She tried to argue that those were genuine needs, not manipulation, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. The conversation ended with her begging for another chance, and me telling her I needed more time to think. Update 2. Dad showed up at my apartment this morning. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He sat in my living room and told me the full story of their finances. Turns out things were worse than I'd known. They'd been living paycheck to paycheck for years before I started helping. Dad's teacher pension was smaller than expected due to budget cuts in the district. Mom's nursing job had reduced her hours right before the pandemic. He admitted they'd become dependent on my support without realizing how bad it had gotten. When I took over the mortgage, they started spending their income on other things instead of saving it. When I covered emergencies, they stopped building an emergency fund. They'd essentially restructured their entire financial life around my contributions. But then he said something that changed my perspective. He told me that Mom's comment about manipulation was wrong. They'd never planned to take advantage of me. However, he admitted that somewhere along the way, they'd stopped seeing my money as gifts and started seeing it as expected support. The line between want and need had blurred completely. He cried as he told me that losing my financial support wasn't just about money anymore. It was about losing the lifestyle they'd built around it. The condo I'd paid off would need to be sold because they couldn't afford the maintenance and property taxes. The retirement I'd been funding would need to be delayed by at least 5 years. I realized this wasn't just about hurt feelings anymore. My parents had become financially dependent on me in ways that would take years to undo. Update 3. I spent the weekend thinking about everything Dad had told me. The more I considered it, the more I realized this situation was more complicated than just my hurt feelings versus their manipulation. I decided to meet with a financial advisor to understand the full scope of what I'd created. Turns out I'd inadvertently built a system that made my parents entirely dependent on my income. Paying off their mortgage was actually the worst thing I could have done because it removed their largest incentive to budget and save. The advisor helped me see that completely cutting them off wasn't just cruel. It was potentially devastating for people in their 60s who'd structured their finances around my support. I called a family meeting for yesterday evening. Mom, Dad, and I sat down with a financial planner to create a realistic plan for their independence. Here's what we agreed on. I would continue covering their basic living expenses for exactly 18 months: utilities, property taxes, insurance, and $1,200 monthly for food and necessities. Nothing else. No emergencies, no extras, no vacations. During those 18 months, they would get financial counseling, create a sustainable budget, and Dad would look into substitute teaching opportunities to supplement his pension. After 18 months, they would be completely financially independent. If they couldn't make it work, they'd need to downsize to something they could afford on their own income. Most importantly, we established new boundaries. No more casual mentions of financial stress. No more hints about things they needed. If they had a genuine emergency after the 18-month period, they would need to ask directly and accept that I might say no. Mom cried through most of the meeting, but she agreed to everything. Dad seemed relieved to have a concrete plan. The hardest part was addressing what I'd overheard. I told Mom that her comment about me being a walking wallet had destroyed my trust in her motivations. She apologized repeatedly, but I explained that apologies weren't enough. She needed to prove through actions that she valued our relationship beyond my financial contributions. Final update. It's been 3 weeks since our family meeting. The change in dynamics has been interesting to observe. Mom calls me twice a week now, but the conversations are different. She asks about my work, my health, my social life, things she used to skip over to get to more pressing topics. She started sharing details about her own life that don't involve money. Last week she called just to tell me about a book she was reading. Dad has already started substitute teaching and seems energized by having a purpose beyond managing their expenses. He's also started doing odd jobs for neighbors, something he hadn't done in years. The most telling change came 10 days ago. Mom called to tell me their dishwasher was making weird noises. In the past, this would have been a not-so-subtle hint that they needed help buying a new one. Instead, she mentioned that Dad was going to look at it first, and if he couldn't fix it, they'd found a used appliance store with reasonable prices. She didn't ask for money. She was just sharing what was happening in their life, the way normal families do. I'm not naive enough to think this proves everything is fixed. 18 months is a long time, and there will probably be moments when old patterns resurface. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm talking to my parents instead of managing their expenses. The frozen accounts remain frozen. I've started putting the money I used to spend on them into a separate savings account. If they successfully become independent after 18 months, I might use that money for something special. Maybe help with a modest vacation or a small emergency fund as a reward for their effort. But if they slip back into old patterns, if they start treating me like a walking wallet again, that money stays put. I've learned that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone isn't giving them what they want. It's forcing them to build what they need. The phone calls have stopped. Both Mom and Dad seem focused on their new reality instead of trying to change my mind. That might be the most encouraging sign of all. I still love my parents, but now I love them as people, not as dependents. And slowly, I think they're learning to see me the same way.